Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tencer, curator of Say Hi to the Future, helping leaders think differently in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity. Better thinking, better outcomes. With me today are Robin Newman and Kalish, here to talk about and bring awareness to human trafficking in Canada. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to our channel. Leave us with a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Robin and Carly, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
This is obviously a challenging topic that we're going to talk about today on so many different levels. And I have to say that when I was prepping for it, what went through my mind was one, it's amazing that the two of you are doing what you're doing, that your organizations are, and that you are working together, because I understand completely the synergy. But I think that what went through my mind even stronger was, how do you do it? I mean, how do you stay balanced and focused in your own life when your day-to-day deals with, I don't know, something so painful? And not to start a talk on a down note, but honestly, that's what was going through my head.
Often I get the question, oh, it's so humble, or I'm like, no. It is like totally the coolest job ever. And to witness human beings' resilience is the biggest honor and privilege. And to see people go through such pain and trauma and to come out at the other side and be okay, and to walk alongside people who are doing so much work on themselves is just like about the coolest thing ever. So the resilience of human beings is what keeps you going.
To play a small part in fixing a very broken system, that really motivates me. And I'm so lucky to work with people like Carly and organizations like Victim Services, who are really at the front lines of crisis intervention. For years, we've been partnering and talked to so many experts like crisis counselors, human rights lawyers, social workers, sexual health educators, and people with firsthand experiences like survivors and youth. And it's those stories that really inform the work and drive us, like Carly is saying. It's that resilience of those deeply personal stories. And when people share traumatic stories with you, or when someone is sharing a challenge that they face in their work or in their life with the hope of seeing something better, to be trusted to come up with an idea that can improve things, it's incredibly motivating, and that's what drives us. So, there's two types of human trafficking. There's labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And we've been focused with Victim Services on domestic sex trafficking. It is such a tough issue. It is painful. It's scary and depressing how our systems can fail so many people. But to be able to look at the cracks in our systems and think about what part of it we can change, I'm super inspired by other people who do that. And like a lot of people who learn about these issues for the first time, I had to unlearn a lot of myths. Thinking about our own role and our limits of what we can do, we want to make stuff that can move the needle. And just like any other job, you roll up your sleeves and you do what you can and get to work.
Hey, well, thank you for that positive spin on it. That makes me feel better as we start off.
There you
go. So, Robin, Studio Jayne, we envision a world where women everywhere are free to choose their future. Talk to me about that, because it's just a wonderful platform.
Studio Jayne was founded in 2021 to take on tech and design work that advances the rights of people who identify as women and girls. And our expertise is doing design research. It's making digital tools that support organizations like Carly's and Victim Services to enhance their missions. So when we do our work, we're thinking about tech-driven solutions across gender, but mostly really focused on women's well-being, whether it's reproductive issues, like how do we improve the experience of, say, fertility treatment and care, or how do we help girls understand and track their periods, to making a tool that improves inclusive sexual health education. And our goal is really to help fill this gap, this neglected area. And I'm really passionate about making stuff that supports and gives greater control, confidence and autonomy to move that needle, to make a more equal world that has historically underrepresented us. My background, I'm a former New York Times employee, and my expertise has been in UX research, product, and interaction design. So I really love making digital stuff better for people who are using those products. And I especially love making stuff to help fill the gap of social needs. So when we decided to do this work and create a company to give it 100% of our time, it was during, it was 1 year into the pandemic, when there was an enormous rise in online exploitation and violence against women and girls. And our team came up with the name Studio Jayne because it's the opposite of a John. And John is a term that's been used a lot to refer to a person who's a client in the sex industry. So this term is changing now, and to be more gender inclusive and acknowledge the nuances and really consider the differentiation between what is consensual sex work, what is exploitation, and what is sex trafficking. It's really important to understand those differences. But metaphorically speaking, we were inspired to start a company and take on work in support of the Jaynes of the world.
Now, just for the audience, give us you mentioned sex trafficking or human trafficking. Give us a little background on what that is and its prevalence in Canada or globally.
Sure. So human trafficking is one of the fastest growing crimes in Canada. And there are many forms of human trafficking, but what we're focused on is specifically sex trafficking, and more specifically, domestic sex trafficking. So if you think about going to the airport, there are two sections. You could go, you could fly internationally, is when you get on a plane in one country, and when you land, you're in a different country. And when you fly domestically, which is when you get on a plane in one country and you land in the same country. Over 90% of the human trafficking, the sex trafficking that exists in Canada, is in fact domestic. So it's happening to people from Canada or people who are in Canada. The reason they came to Canada, nothing to do with their human trafficking, and then they're trafficked here. And the movement that takes place is here within Canada. So that's the majority of what human trafficking looks like: domestic sex trafficking. It's disproportionately impacting women and girls. We have seen survivors as young as 12 and people in their late 30s, early 40s being trafficked. And it goes mostly unreported. So there's some stats that say 16,000 people in Canada are being trafficked annually. But we know from working at Victim Services Toronto, we support hundreds of survivors a year, many of which do not report to law enforcement for a myriad of reasons. And unfortunately, the way the statistics are collected is through data that's from law enforcement. And so we can imagine that it's much bigger than what Stats Can is representing.
So that for me is eye-opening. I never imagined that 90% would have been domestic. What is the support system? What is being done to think about or counter this? And I will get back to your game and what you do, but I'm sorry, that number I just never would have crossed my mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done, but mostly it's working with survivors, victims and survivors, however they self-identify, from a place of without judgment or assumption. And we work from a place that doesn't save or rescue people, but empowers them to, with the option and choice to leave when they're ready, and provide them with the basic needs they need in order, like their traffickers are meeting their needs. Disproportionately, the people who are being trafficked are people who've experienced previous relational trauma. Traffickers often are boyfriends or what they would consider, like what the victim or survivor would consider their boyfriend, their friend, or in fact, a family member. And those people are meeting their basic needs. They're making them feel loved and that they belong. And they're boosting their self-esteem, and they're physically providing for them, like a roof over their heads, food in their bellies. We believe it's unfair, in fact, to ask somebody to leave their trafficking situation unless you have found replacement ways to meet their needs. And so that's the work of Victim Services Toronto and many partner agencies that we work alongside with, that because one agency can't possibly do that alone.
Right.
And the key to this, we believe the antidote to human trafficking is prevention and education. And that's where Likely Story comes in, because if you equip people to understand what a healthy relationship is, boundaries, consent, all of those pieces, knowledge of all those pieces are the foundation of seeking help earlier should someone be recruiting you or luring you into this, which is not to blame people for it's not their fault that they're being trafficked. But if we can disrupt the supply of human trafficking survivors through Likely Story and other prevention resources, then, we're doing our jobs.
Wow. So Robin, Likely Story, digital game, my understanding it is based on how pimps and traffickers use romantic relationships to coerce girls into sex trafficking. How does that come about? How do you gamify and connect and communicate?
Games are an amazing tool for education, and we like to say that games get teens talking. So our goal has always been, how do we raise awareness? How do we help unlock conversations to better inform people who are playing this game? And the benefit of using games on a very heavy topic like sex trafficking is you reduce the barrier to entry into the conversation. You can make it playful and meaningful. You can convey a really complex concept and promote critical thinking skills through a more accessible, enjoyable, and interactive style. And it's actually helping to increase learning and knowledge retention. I think a lot of people hear you're using a game for what? And, hearing that you're using a game for such a challenging topic at first sounds like an oxymoron, but it's been so effective in helping us to reach teens and not make it seem like they have, they're being held under a microscope, but really helping them work through the tricky moments that they might face every day in a safe environment, in an environment that feels non-judgmental, that feels anonymous. And we started this work by, ensuring that all the scenarios that we put in the game are scenarios that are actually real life scenarios of teens. The perspective of the different stages of trafficking, we considered in a lot of our research, and the experts who have guided us, we considered what are the stages of trafficking and how do we break those down into micro moments and put those into the game so that teens are then going to be reflecting on them and reacting to them in an instinctual way within the game moment. And, we want teens to feel prepared for their future. So the goal is really increasing self-esteem, increasing self-worth, and thinking about intent as they play and face these uncomfortable situations. They're later going to be talking about and exploring how should we really be dealing with them. And instinctually, when you go through the fight, flight, or freeze responses in the moment, your body is already starting to experience it as if it could have occurred. So, we've been working with all of our experts to build that into the game, and its scenarios now range far beyond just trafficking and think about things like online safety, emotional boundaries, healthy relationships, and much broader categories that extend into sexual health education and all of those protective factors which Carly was referring to. So, again, it's just how do we think through uncomfortable situations in a safe and fun way to prepare for those things that could happen in real life. And, I'm really proud of all the content that we've built into the game and the participatory way that we've developed it, working extremely closely under the guidance of all of these incredible people who have contributed to the game. So every scenario you see in the game, every what we call hot tip, which is some wisdom and guidance in the game, and trusted resources that we provide at the end of the game, have all been thoughtfully developed and constructed under many years of thinking about what's appropriate, how is this really going to be culturally relevant, how is this going to be contextually relevant, age appropriate, and truly resonate with teens. But we always say that the game's not really over until you talk about it and reflect after. So we picture this game being played in environments that are facilitated, and that's where victim services teams are really experts in bringing this game into communities and helping to debrief what happened in the game. And we're seeing incredible results. We've already received awards from Webby. We've gotten a Webby nominee, and we've gotten an Anthem Awards for being a responsible tool and technological innovation to make changes in the world of sexual health education. And we're really trying to integrate that positive play and stay away from fear-based tactics to make sex ed something that is normalized. We're really inspired by, one of our favorite quotes by a designer, Charles Eames, says, "Games and tools are preludes to serious ideas." And it is this concept that games, from the outside looking in, are seemingly innocent, but there's so much more to them. And it's really the power of play and using a light intervention is what makes this really work and what makes teens come to the table. And yeah, seeing all the positive impact.
It's like feeding a kid vegetables, like a zucchini chocolate chip muffin without them knowing it's vegetables, right? Like you're learning, but you don't know you're learning. You're just having fun, right? Like how cool is that bonus that you're learning? And I think it's also really important to know that this game is good for any young person, not just at risk, like the people you would think would be at risk for being trafficked. Like this game should be a tool that every parent and every teacher and every school leans on, because the scenarios that you're basically planning for a scenario that you'll inevitably be in as a teenage kid, and it prepares you for how you would respond. Bonus that it's equipping you with tools to not be trafficked. But every person should show this to their teenager, because it helps you prepare and keep yourself safe. So I think that's what's really also really cool about it.
So when you talk about learning outcomes. So one, I'm interested, like what age group are you working with? And if there are different ones, because I'm guessing that there are, and you need to tailor your message and language. And what would the learning outcomes be?
We define youth as broadly as someone who is as young as age 10 up to age 24. And that said, our primary focus right now is really honed in on grades 7 to 9, which is that 12 to 15-year-old range. And we're focused on this age, not just because it's an appropriate time to have these conversations. We actually believe you can begin those conversations much earlier, but girls and teens, all the statistics show that they're being recruited as young as age 12. And that's why we really want to begin at a much earlier intervention.
Also, in terms of impact, I think it's really important to note that not only can you play this game like with your friends, when you're hanging out, having a sleepover, or just like hanging out after school, but teachers can also play this game in the classroom, right? Like it, in lots of ways, aligns with curriculum. And so for teachers, and often teachers are really uncomfortable too, having, conversations about like gender-based violence and, how to be safe online, sexting, all of the things that young people are talking about and experiencing every minute of every day. And so it is like a way for teachers to bring these topics into their classroom and equips them with a tool that they can use to also, bridge those uncomfortable things that they might not feel, comfortable creating a lesson plan on themselves. It does that for them. And so we're really hoping, and that's, one of our major goals is to really get this into as many classrooms and as many school boards as we possibly can, in addition for young people playing on their own. And I think the other thing that's we always need to consider when engaging young people, and you've taught me this word, Robin, is the stickiness of something. So how often does a young person want to go back and play again, right? Like, so that would really be impactful to measure how often someone told their friends about it, or how often they decided to play again, because it will prepare them in life. And so we're really hoping that Likely Story is sticky.
Yeah. And I'll just add one more part in terms of like measuring our impact. I feel like this is an ever evolving thing that we are always pushing ourselves to scale across not just Toronto and Ontario, thinking about what are the benchmarks that we need to measure against. And there's some incredible organizations out there, like CCAN is one of them, and they set the sexual health guidelines across Canada and really help to deliver, or at least incentivize delivering comprehensive sexual health education and policies. And so we look to experts who are already doing this work, who have the benchmarks, and we're trying to align that to the curriculum and to the guidelines that, the Ministry of Education or Ontario is already setting. So that we're not recreating the wheel of what is the impact that we should be having, but rather making sure that our tool is effective in actually meeting that.
When you talk about that, and when you talk about teachers working with it, there's so many stories, there's so many issues that come out about what we can speak to in a classroom, how we can speak about it. How do you get that approved, if you will, or into the education system?
Oh yeah,
Because
hot topic.
yeah,
Well, I mean, it sounds like if you're talking about sex trafficking, oh my God, that's not appropriate for children. I mean, we're not on the nose talking about sex trafficking. We're talking about the things that lead someone to be trafficked, which is really the luring and the grooming and exploitation and all of these pieces that if we can get young people to identify when situations like that are on the line of that, we're equipping them to potentially and hopefully not be trafficked. So we're not talking about details of human trafficking or like trauma stories in the game. Like we can give you some scenarios, for example. So like you're in an Uber and your driver hits on you. What would you do? And so like we would give you options that you could choose from.
okay.
Some are funny, some are playful, and some are like really what you want your kid to do. And so we're really just equipping them with these tools.
And maybe one thing to add is, I think Victim Services already has established relationships with school boards, and in terms of reaching those students in the classroom and being able to have that approved. There's definitely been some considerations that we've had to think about as we bring this into the school boards and as we ensure that it's culturally relevant, it's age appropriate. Is this curriculum aligned? There are some things that you would never think about, like firewalls and ITs that are blocked, and how do we get through that? So it's really been like some of the lessons that we've learned along the way and trial and error. And I think once people play it and they see it and they see the impact, that's when it all clicks and makes sense. But it's been fairly actually easy for us to get into the classrooms, which is not the story of most people who are entering the school system. We've been really fortunate to have incredible support and get in through through the presentations you're already doing.
I mean, Victim Services Toronto has really long-standing relationships with the principals associations and really long-standing relationships with school boards directly. And we physically go into schools and do presentations almost every day. And have been doing so for years. And so through relationship and through, honesty, and here it is, tell us your feedback, right? Like the whole goal is to make this a useful tool. So if the school boards don't think it's useful, then, what's the point? And so everything is about collaboration and working together in order to make sure that it's as useful for all stakeholders as possible. And through that, we've been lucky.
Yeah. And we're still learning as we go. I think, we're always getting feedback from the staff who are going into the schools, from teachers who are using this game. And it's really helping us to adapt our content and the way that we play. So it's really important for us that we are always having an ear to the ground of whether it's the youth who are playing the game, parents who are concerned about what's happening in the classroom, teachers who are executing but maybe feel ill-equipped or they're not sexual health education experts, right? This is something that
Right.
is part of many other things that they have to do in a school year. So it's really trying to make that easier. And if we're not making it easy to do, then we haven't done our job. So that is, part of our work, thinking about designing this and implementing it effectively is paying attention to the system around it and making sure that it works for that school system and all the organizations involved who are really have the same goals and want everybody to learn and walk away with stronger, better education that's effective.
So you mentioned, you just ended with a better education that's effective and that teachers aren't necessarily trained or educated in this sort of, programmatic learning, if you will. Neither are parents.
Yep.
How do we how do we better educate ourselves and our children? How do we speak to these things at home? Is that part of what you do?
That's such a good question. I mean, number one, I would say play the game, right? Like if you want to get a good feel for what young people are like, scenarios that the young people will inevitably be in, and play the game like yourselves. I have like all these nieces and we were all together over the break and we all played together, the parents, and we laughed our heads off and learned and had the best time. I would say that. And a part of the game is a whole resource library, right? So there, at the end of the game, you're connected to all of these incredible resources so that young people and parents can learn more. VST, so Victim Services Toronto, specifically does parent prevention education sessions in partnership with school boards to talk to parents and equip them with tools exactly like this. And there are resources, of course, that are specific to parents. But I mean, I would say play the game with your kid, right? Like, there's ways for parents to get involved in this and engage in. It would also be a conversation opener, right? Like you played the game or you showed your child the game, you got them to play on their own or with their friends or with you. And then like, what a beautiful way to have like a really light introduction to like a very heavy subject matter.
Yeah, I'll add that, I think putting my product hat on for a moment, that I am not a parent, but I have many nieces and nephews. And I agree that even myself as a 37-year-old woman doing this project, I am learning every day and unlearning the things that I grew up with and looking at generations, today and wondering, where are the resources and the places that we go to set those foundations up and learn. And I do think that there's more that adults and parents can do to reflect on their own biases, their own education, just be proactive, right? This is a starting conversation and that's the point. It is a gateway to opening up so much knowledge, and it is endless. It is such a complex, beautifully deep world of sexual health education that is very charged. And I think it can be uncharged just to be less politically charged in many ways. That is just, this is evidence-based education. This is stuff that we need to be talking about. We should be more comfortable talking about, removing those taboos so that we can be at a dinner table talking about this and it doesn't have to be scary. Our game is one of many. And, we would be so excited to take on a parent version where we can really get input from parents to think about what is the home environment and context like, because that is a different context. And I think there's a lot of values in the home that are going to be different than, that perhaps we have to be considerate of, that may not come into play in the same way in the classroom. And so there's lots in there to unpack and think about. From a parent perspective, what would be important and how do you have that conversation meaningfully with your children over time, right? Because this doesn't have to be something that when you hit puberty, you're just talking about this now. This is like, you can be having this Carly, you're a parent. Tell me, what age should we be starting this conversation?
Oh, don't get me started. People think I'm crazy. I have two little girls who are 3 and 6. And I literally have a hula hoop at home and I'm like, Florence, who's allowed in your hula hoop? Who's not allowed in your hula? What if someone comes into your, like, I'm not teaching her about sex, but I am equipping her with like the underlying concept of consent. Like, I believe you should have those conversations from the minute your kids are born. And yeah, I love the idea of somehow making a parent version, but yeah, no, I that's what this is. It's again, like you're building a foundation of protective factors, right? Which will hopefully keep your kids safe.
Boy, I love the use of the hula hoop. Or you said so many amazing things, but as a parent, and I took away a lot more than that. And again, my kids are way past that. Some of them have hit 30s. So, but boy, what an interesting concept. So anyway, Robin Newman, Studio Jayne, Carly Kalish, Victim Services Toronto. As our time comes close to an end, it's really gone quickly, actually. Very stimulating conversation, at least, and I've learned way more than I thought I would have. Good and not as good as I would like to learn about our world. Last little question. It goes back to that parent thing, and I love the idea of the parent game or the parent guide, because one thing is preparation. The other thing for me is recognition. And there's sort of those black hole years that can appear between tween and teen where it's, speak to the hand. And you try your best, but what, just leave us with some thoughts of red flags, things that we might notice as a parent.
Yeah, so, and those red flags are built into scenarios of the game as well. But red flags for being trafficked, like when you suspect someone is being trafficked. So, I mean, the first thing you want to do is think about the vulnerability factors, like the risk factors of who this could happen to. So I think of it as like a Venn diagram. So two overlapping circles. And one circle, I would think of like individual vulnerabilities. So not feeling adequately loved or supported, previous abuse, maybe a developmental disability, feeling bullied, not being connected at school, not having many friends, things like that. And then on the other side of that circle, so the other circle that are overlapping would be the systemic risk factors. So being racialized, being Indigenous, being a girl, being a newcomer, being from a community that lacks resources, where there's a high proximity to crime. And if you could check mark both individual and systemic risk factors, of course, you're at the highest risk for being recruited or being lured into trafficking. But the biggest thing you can do as a parent is have open, honest conversations with your kid. And for the parents to take on the risk, and most importantly, to not judge them, right? Like so often survivors will tell us like, oh, I can't talk to my parents because they'll say, well, you were, you went to a party at a hotel, or you did this with this guy. Like the judgment is preventing the conversation from continuing and from the young person getting the support they need. So I think the biggest takeaway is if you suspect your kid is involved in this in some way, is to say, I don't care what it is that you're doing. I love you. I love you. I love you. Come home.
Right.
Something like that, right? Like, I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
Working with young people.
Anyone can go to likelystory.game to play.
Robin and Carly, thank you. Wow, so much for this time, for your conversation, and for giving us some watch outs there. I think it's so important as a parent, obviously. And thank you for the work you're doing.
Thanks for having us. It was lovely talking with you.
Thank you so much.